The silent signal, how an 8-year-old boy took down a trafficking ring. Sergeant Rex froze mid-stride in the bustling heart of Central Station, his body rigid as though he'd encountered something supernatural. His ears snapped forward, tuned into a frequency beyond human perception. Through the sea of commuters, an 8-year-old black boy was discreetly tapping a pattern on the back of an elegantly dressed white woman who gripped his hand with suffocating tightness. The pattern repeated itself. 5 deliberate taps, a pause, then 5 more taps. His frightened eyes locked with Rex's for a fleeting moment before darting away, as if he'd been meticulously trained to remain invisible. Tommy Wilson never imagined his 8th year would be defined by paralyzing terror. Just 3 weeks ago, he'd been playing carefree in his grandmother's backyard when his entire world collapsed. Now, disguised in expensive clothing with a drastically different haircut, he was forced to masquerade as the son of people who viewed him as nothing more than merchandise. "Keep your head down and don't make eye contact with anyone," the woman hissed, crushing his fingers until they throbbed. "Remember what happens if you try anything stupid." Detective James Morrison, Rex's partner for 7 years, followed his German shepherd's unwavering stare. "What is it, boy? What are you picking up on?" Rex had never been wrong. Throughout their years together, every one of his suspicions had proven accurate. But this situation was different. There was no scent of narcotics, explosives, or contraband that would explain such intense agitation. This was something more nuanced, more deeply human. Morrison observed the seemingly perfect family making their way toward the 3:30 p.m. train to Seattle. The woman wore designer labels from head to toe. The man conducted business calls in the polished tone of a corporate executive. 3 impeccably dressed, obedient children completed the picture. They appeared to be a typical affluent American family returning from vacation, except for Tommy's eyes. Those eyes held a terror no 8-year-old should ever experience. "Come on, Rex. We can't confront random people just because you're having an off day," Morrison muttered, tugging the leash. But Rex planted his paws and refused to budge. For the first time in 7 years, the dog outright disobeyed a direct command. His stance remained unmovable as he watched Tommy vanish into the crowd, still tapping that silent code against the woman's back. Morrison's brow furrowed. Rex never behaved this way, without legitimate cause. What if that child was genuinely crying out for help in the only way a trained dog could recognize? What Morrison couldn't know was that Tommy had learned that specific signal, 5 rhythmic taps, from a documentary about police dogs he'd watched at his grandmother's house mere weeks before his life transformed into an unending nightmare. It represented his last desperate hope of being discovered before it was too late. If you're questioning how an 8-year-old possessed the intelligence to employ a code that only police dogs recognize, prepare to discover that sometimes survival awakens a wisdom that even adults cannot comprehend. Subscribe to the channel, because this story of courage and instinct will demonstrate that heroes come in every size, and sometimes they walk on 4 legs. The woman noticed Rex's persistent attention and tightened her grip on Tommy's hand until he winced. "Stop being so dramatic," she whispered with venom in her voice. "No one here is going to save you." Margaret Whitefield, 45, specialized in facilitated international adoptions, an elegant euphemism for luxury human trafficking. She'd perfected her performance as a devoted mother over 15 years in this deplorable business. Her husband Richard, a pharmaceutical executive, provided the ideal cover, a well-educated white couple with the financial means to offer opportunities to disadvantaged children. "Daddy expects you to behave like an obedient son," Richard whispered in Tommy's ear, his words dripping with veiled menace. "Remember what happened to the last boy who attempted to run away?" Tommy's throat constricted. 3 weeks ago, he'd been innocently playing in his grandmother's backyard when 2 men appeared, posing as social workers. "Your mother's been in an accident. You need to come with us immediately," they'd insisted. His grandmother was out shopping, and Tommy, frightened and confused, had complied without resistance. Since that moment, he'd been trapped in a meticulously orchestrated nightmare. During daylight hours, he was forced to rehearse being their son, calling them mom and dad, smiling for photographs, memorizing fabricated stories about his new privileged existence. At night, Locked inside expensive hotel rooms, he overheard phone conversations about scheduled deliveries and satisfied end customers. Morrison watched the family proceed toward their train, but something about the man's demeanor disturbed him. Richard compulsively checked his phone, his eyes scanning the crowd with barely concealed paranoia. The way he gripped the older child's shoulder seemed more like restraint than paternal affection. "Rex, stay," Morrison commanded, releasing the leash. "Let's investigate discreetly." The German Shepherd moved like a phantom through the crowd, maintaining a safe distance while never losing sight of Tommy. His protective instincts blazed at maximum alert. That small boy didn't carry the scent of family, didn't move with the ease of a comfortable child, didn't react like a cherished son. Margaret noticed the dog approaching and urgently whispered something to Richard. He immediately made a call. "Change of plans. There's a German Shepherd tailing us. Activate Protocol B." Tommy overheard the exchange and felt his stomach plummet. Protocol B meant sedation, sleeping for hours, waking disoriented in an unfamiliar location. It meant his chances of rescue would drastically diminish. But Morrison was closer than they realized. With 15 years of experience in abduction cases, he'd learned to interpret subtle signals. This family's body language screamed deception, excessive control, insufficient natural affection, too much tension for people supposedly on a leisure vacation. He discreetly activated his radio. "Dispatch, I need background checks on a suspicious family. Train 247, Platform 12. Possible child endangerment situation." "Negative, Morrison. No warrant, no probable cause. We can't approach civilians based on intuition." Tommy glanced over his shoulder once more, his eyes meeting Rex's for 2 precious seconds. This time, he took a dangerous risk. He discreetly pointed toward Richard's backpack while tapping the 5-beat code against his own leg. Rex barked once, sharp and loud enough to attract attention. Morrison caught the exchange, and something clicked in his mind. This kid wasn't merely frightened. He was attempting to communicate specific intelligence. What if Rex wasn't detecting drugs or explosives, but rather the scent of multiple children embedded in those people's belongings? Margaret whirled toward Tommy furiously. "Final warning," she hissed, squeezing his wrist hard enough to leave marks. "The next time you draw attention to yourself, you'll discover the basement where children who don't obey are kept." What Margaret didn't realize was that Tommy had spent 3 weeks observing, listening, and memorizing every detail of her operation. At 8 years old, he already knew names, locations, phone numbers, and codes that could dismantle the entire network. Morrison, who'd followed Rex's instincts for 7 years, was beginning to understand that his partner wasn't simply detecting danger. He was detecting an extraordinarily intelligent boy attempting to orchestrate his own rescue in a way no adult would ever imagine possible. As the train approached the platform, Tommy drew a deep breath and made the most courageous decision of his young life. If that dog was trying to help him, he would provide Rex with every piece of information needed to save him, regardless of the risk. Inside the train, Tommy was shoved into a window seat with Margaret blocking any possibility of escape. Richard sat directly across from him, pretending to read a newspaper while monitoring the aisle. The other 2 children, Lisa, 10, and Marcus, 12, remained completely silent, their vacant stares trained on avoiding attention. "Remember the rules," Margaret whispered, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "We're a happy family returning from a Disneyland vacation. Dad works in technology, Mom is a teacher, and you are our blessed adopted children." Tommy nodded obediently, but his mind was operating at maximum capacity. During 3 weeks of captivity, he'd memorized every detail of the operation. Margaret coordinated 6 different families across 5 states. Richard managed logistics and falsified documentation. The real mastermind, known only as the Doctor, never appeared in person. As the train accelerated, Tommy watched Margaret type a message. "Package 3 delivered on schedule. Client awaiting Seattle. Transfer confirmed to Cayman account number 4472. $45,000. That was his market value, his worth on the black market for forced adoptions. In the adjacent car, Detective Morrison discreetly showed Tommy's photo to the train conductor. Have you seen this young boy? Possible abduction case. Conductor Helen Rodriguez, 38 and a mother of two, studied the image carefully. Yes, I saw him with an elegant family in car 7, but the woman had adoption papers. She called him her son. Documents can be forged, Morrison muttered. My partner Rex detected something. That dog never makes mistakes. Helen frowned, recalling something unusual. Now that you mention it, the boy seemed extremely tense. And the woman was holding him very tightly, as if afraid he'd bolt. Morrison's police instincts ignited. Can I take a discreet look? Meanwhile, Tommy was executing the riskiest phase of his improvised plan. 3 weeks of observing professional criminals had taught him that documentation was everything in this business. He'd noticed something Margaret didn't know he'd seen. During a bathroom break, he'd watched Richard conceal a folder inside a specific backpack, a folder containing not only his falsified documents, but those of at least a dozen other missing children. Tommy feigned nausea. I need to use the bathroom, he said in a weak voice. Lisa will accompany you, Margaret ordered. And remember, 5 minutes maximum. Lisa, traumatized by months of captivity, obediently followed Tommy. But in the corridor, he whispered something that stopped her cold. Do you want to see your family again? The girl's eyes welled with tears. They told me my parents don't want me anymore. That's a lie, Tommy replied with conviction beyond his years. My grandmother taught me that real families never give up. But I need your help to save us all. Helen Rodriguez discreetly accompanied Morrison to car 7, where Rex waited with escalating agitation. The dog had caught Tommy's scent passing through the corridor and was now gently scratching at the door. It's that family over there, Helen indicated toward Margaret and Richard. Morrison observed the scene, a well-dressed couple with seemingly normal behavior, but something in their body language screamed falsehood. The woman obsessively checked her phone. The man clutched a backpack, as if it contained national secrets. And the children looked like programmed automatons. Helen, I need a favor, Morrison whispered. Approach them with some excuse to verify their tickets. I want to observe how they react to authority. When Helen approached the family, Margaret immediately tensed. Is there a problem, ma'am? Routine check, Helen smiled pleasantly. Could you show me your tickets and the children's documentation? Richard nearly dropped his newspaper. The children are in the restroom, but we have everything here. He opened his wallet with movements far too nervous for an innocent person. That's when Tommy reappeared in the aisle, followed by Lisa. But this time, instead of the 5-tap code, he did something far riskier. As he passed Helen, he discreetly dropped a small folded paper at her feet. Margaret didn't notice. Richard was too preoccupied searching for documents. But Helen, trained to observe details during her shifts, spotted it immediately. The paper contained a message written in desperate, childish handwriting. We are not their children. Help. There are 12 of us. Black backpack has proof. Helen felt her blood turn to ice. She discreetly signaled Morrison with her eyes. Tommy returned to his seat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd gambled everything on that moment. But watching Richard nervously handling the backpack that contained evidence of dozens of crimes, he knew he'd made the correct decision. Margaret relaxed when Helen walked away, apparently satisfied. See? No one suspects anything when you act like a normal family, she said with poisonous arrogance. What she didn't know was that Tommy had spent 3 weeks not merely surviving but studying every aspect of the criminal operation. He knew names, account numbers, trafficking routes, and most critically, the exact location where other children were being held. Morrison returned to his car and activated his radio with controlled urgency. Dispatch, I have confirmation of an abduction in progress. Train 247, car 7. Requesting immediate interception at the next station. Negative, Morrison. Need more substantial evidence for legal intervention. Then I'll obtain evidence, he muttered, looking at Rex. His four-legged partner had detected more than danger. He detected an extraordinary boy orchestrating his own liberation from within the web of an international criminal enterprise. Tommy drew a deep breath, watching the landscape blur past the window. At the next station in Portland, they would have only a 7-minute stop. 7 minutes to execute the final phase of a plan that an 8-year-old had developed by studying professional criminals. Margaret checked her phone once more, smiling with cruel satisfaction. 2 hours to Seattle. Soon you'll be with your new family, Tommy. A family that will teach you to be far more obedient. For a moment, when she spoke of new family in that threatening tone, everyone nearby thought they saw fear flash in Tommy's eyes. But anyone observing closely would have noticed it wasn't fear shining there. It was the unwavering determination of someone who had transformed 3 weeks of horror into a masterclass on criminal psychology and was now prepared to use that knowledge to destroy their entire operation. The Portland Station Showdown. The Portland Station materialized through the window like a golden opportunity. 7 minutes of scheduled stop. Tommy drew a steadying breath. It was now or never. "I need to pee urgently," he said in a distressed voice, clutching his stomach theatrically. Margaret rolled her eyes in annoyance. "Lisa, go with him. And both of you, don't take a second longer than necessary." But Tommy had calculated every move. In the corridor, he whispered to Lisa, "When we reach the bathroom, you scream as loud as you can. Scream that we're not their children." "They'll hurt me," the girl trembled. "Not if we're surrounded by people. Trust me." Meanwhile, Detective Morrison had convinced Helen Rodriguez to conduct a second verification. "I want to observe their reaction when you request specific documentation for the children. Criminals always become nervous about details." Helen approached the couple again. "Apologies for the inconvenience, but I need to verify the children's birth certificates. Standard procedure for minors traveling interstate." Richard's blood turned cold. The documents are in our carry-on luggage. I can retrieve them when the children return." "No problem. I can wait." Helen smiled, deliberately sitting in the seat beside them. Margaret frantically typed a message. "Problem. Inspector requesting specific documents. Abort mission." The reply came instantly. "Impossible. Client has already paid. Resolve discreetly." That's when Lisa's scream pierced through the entire car. "We are not their children. They kidnapped us. Help." The entire car came to an abrupt halt. Conversations ceased instantly. Every eye turned toward the aisle where Tommy appeared running, shouting, "She's telling the truth. We are kidnapped children." Margaret sprang to her feet like lightning, attempting to maintain her composure. "Our children are having an episode. Psychological issues. You understand how it is." But Tommy had prepared for precisely this moment. "If we're your children, what's my full name? When's my birthday? Where was I born?" Margaret opened and closed her mouth like a fish suffocating on dry land. Richard was perspiring profusely, clutching his backpack desperately. "Tommy Andrew Wilson," the boy announced to the entire car. "I was born on June 15th in Detroit. My grandmother's name is Betty Wilson and she lives at 247 Oak Street. My father's name is Jerome Wilson and he serves in the Army." Helen Rodriguez felt every word like a physical blow to her chest. "Sir," she said to Richard in a voice as cold as winter steel, "open that backpack immediately." "You have no authority to," Richard began. Morrison appeared in the car, accompanied by Rex, who immediately charged toward Tommy, barking with relief at finding the boy safe. "Detective Morrison, Police Department. And I have all the authority I need," he announced, displaying his badge. "Open the backpack, or I'll open it myself." Margaret attempted one final desperate gambit. "Officers, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. These children have been traumatized by—" Tommy interrupted with the force of someone 3 times his age. "Do you want me to tell everyone here the names of the other 9 children they have hidden in Seattle? Do you want me to discuss the $45,000 they received for me?" The silence in the car was suffocating. Passengers recorded everything on their phones. An elderly woman held her hand over her mouth in horror. Morrison forced open Richard's backpack. What he discovered made his stomach churn. Dozens of falsified documents, photographs of children, altered passports, and a notebook containing the names, ages, and market values of abducted minors. "Margaret Whitefield and Richard Sullivan." Morrison read from one of the documents. You are under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, document forgery, and— Wait, Margaret shouted, realizing she had completely lost control of the situation. You don't understand. We saved these children from miserable lives. We provide them opportunities. Tommy looked directly at her with a maturity that made the entire car shudder. $45,000 isn't saving, ma'am. It's selling. Rex positioned himself between the children and the criminals, emitting a low growl, the sound of justice finding its target. Helen Rodriguez radioed the conductor. Stop the train immediately. Emergency situation. Criminals on board. As the train decelerated, Morrison handcuffed Margaret and Richard. You have the right to remain silent. He's just a child. Richard exploded, pointing at Tommy in desperation. How did an 8-year-old child destroy us? Tommy smiled for the first time in 3 weeks, a smile that carried wisdom far beyond his years. My grandmother always said, when you're the weakest person in the room, be the smartest. You thought I was just merchandise. But I've been studying you since day one. The boy pulled a small tape recorder from his pocket, an old model his grandmother had given him as a gift. 3 weeks of recorded conversations, names, phone numbers, addresses. Everything's here. Margaret fainted. Lisa and Marcus embraced Tommy, crying with relief. Passengers applauded spontaneously. A woman offered chocolate. A man was already calling the numbers Tommy recited from memory, alerting authorities about other children in danger. When the train came to a complete stop, a full police operation was already waiting on the platform. FBI, local police, social workers. Tommy had provided enough intelligence to dismantle the entire network in real time. Morrison knelt to the boy's eye level. How did you know Rex would understand you? My grandmother showed me a documentary about police dogs, Tommy replied, affectionately petting Rex. They sense when children are in danger, even when they can't explain it to humans. I just had to give him signals he would recognize. Helen Rodriguez wiped away tears. In 20 years of working on trains, I've never witnessed such courage. As Margaret and Richard were taken away in separate police vehicles, Margaret screamed one final time, "This won't stop our operation. We're just a small part of it." Tommy looked at her through the window, his eyes carrying a determination that made the criminal realize her fatal mistake. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I memorized everything. Names, places, bank accounts, routes. When I'm finished talking to the FBI, your operation will be history." Rex barked once, a sound of victory that echoed through the station. For a moment, as everyone watched that 8-year-old boy being embraced by police officers and social workers, the question hanging in the air was simple. How did a child manage to defeat an international criminal organization using only intelligence, courage, and the partnership of a dog who believed in him when no adult would? The answer resided in Tommy's eyes that had transformed 3 weeks of nightmare into the biggest victory against child trafficking that region had ever witnessed. 6 months later, justice served. Tommy Wilson sat in the front row of the federal courtroom, watching Margaret Whitefield and Richard Sullivan receive their sentences, 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The 8-year-old boy they had catastrophically underestimated had become the key witness who destroyed an international human trafficking ring. Tommy Wilson's testimony, declared federal Judge Henderson, was the most extraordinary this court has ever witnessed. An 8-year-old child demonstrated more courage and investigative intelligence than many experienced detectives. Margaret looked at Tommy one final time before being led away in handcuffs. Her eyes, once filled with cruel arrogance, now showed only the emptiness of someone who had lost absolutely everything. Richard couldn't even lift his head. The successful executive had become a broken shell of a man, destroyed by the intelligence of a child he'd considered nothing more than merchandise. In the gallery, Detective Morrison and Rex watched with quiet pride. "You know what's most impressive?" Morrison whispered to Helen Rodriguez, who had traveled specifically to witness the outcome. "It wasn't luck. Tommy planned every move from the first day of his captivity." The investigation triggered by Tommy's information had resulted in the arrest of 43 criminals across 7 different states. 86 children were rescued from situations of trafficking, forced adoption, and slave labor. The doctor, the true mastermind of the operation, was identified as Dr. Harrison Blackwood, a respected Boston pediatrician who had used his position to select premium merchandise in public hospitals. Tommy had memorized not only names and addresses but bank codes, transportation routes, and even computer passwords he'd overheard during phone conversations. His 8-year-old mind had become a living database that completely dismantled an organization that had been operating for over a decade. "How did you manage to remember everything?" asked FBI Special Agent Amanda Cross during one of the final interviews. "My grandmother always said that when you don't have the power to fight hard, you fight with your head," Tommy replied with wisdom beyond his years. "They thought I was just a scared kid, but I was studying them while they studied us." Operation Tommy, as it was officially named, became a case study in police academies across the country. An 8-year-old black boy, using only intelligence and courage, had achieved what entire task forces had failed to accomplish for years. Betty Wilson, Tommy's grandmother, wept as she embraced her grandson in court. "I always knew you were special, boy, but I never imagined you would save so many children." Jerome Wilson, Tommy's father, had obtained emergency leave from the Army to be present at the sentencing. "Son," he said with a trembling voice, "you've done more for others in 3 weeks than many people do in a lifetime." Lisa and Marcus, the other children rescued from the train, were recovering with their real families. Lisa had started therapy and was slowly regaining her lost confidence. Marcus, traumatized by longer captivity, still faced difficulties, but he had renewed hope after witnessing that even in impossible situations, intelligence could overcome evil. Detective Morrison was promoted to lieutenant and became a national expert on child trafficking cases. Rex received a Medal of Honor and retired as the most decorated police dog in the department's history. But for both of them, the greatest reward was knowing they had trusted their instincts when everyone around them had doubted. Helen Rodriguez left her job on the trains and became the coordinator of an NGO specializing in identifying signs of human trafficking on public transportation. "Tommy taught me that heroes come in all sizes," she said in a lecture to station employees. "Sometimes we just need to stop and truly observe the children around us." Margaret Whitefield, in federal prison, discovered that her arrogance had been her complete downfall. Other inmates learned of her crimes against children, and her life became a daily hell. Richard Sullivan suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the psychiatric ward, unable to accept that he'd been defeated by a mere child. Dr. Blackwood, exposed thanks to Tommy's information, lost his medical license, his personal fortune, and was sentenced to life in prison. "How did an 8-year-old child manage to destroy us?" he repeated obsessively to anyone who would listen. Tommy returned to school as a normal boy, but he carried with him the certainty that he had changed the world. His grades improved, he made new friends, and he discovered a passion for investigation that would lead him to consider a career in law enforcement in the future. In an interview on national television, Tommy was asked what he had learned from the entire experience. "I learned that bad adults always underestimate children," he replied with a calm smile. "They think that because we're small, we're stupid. But my grandmother taught me that size has nothing to do with intelligence." The host asked what he would say to other children in dangerous situations. "Never give up. Always pay attention to everything around you. And if you see a police dog, remember that they're trained to protect children. They will understand if you ask for help in the right way." Rex, who was present in the studio, barked once when Tommy finished speaking, as if approving every word. The legacy. Tommy Wilson's story proved that heroism doesn't depend on age, size, or physical strength. It depends on courage, intelligence, and the refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. Margaret Whitefield tried to break a child's spirit, but ended up being destroyed by the unwavering determination she underestimated. At the age of 8, Tommy taught the world that sometimes the smallest warriors fight the biggest battles. And when they fight with their hearts and minds united, they can defeat giants who consider themselves invincible. If this story touched your heart and showed you that true courage has no age, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that prove that justice, even when it seems impossible, always finds a way to prevail through those who refuse to accept the unacceptable. Sometimes the bravest heroes walk on four legs. Sometimes they're only 8 years old. But they always remind us that intelligence, courage, and compassion can change the world, one silent signal at a time.